And I remember him saying at the time, you know, because I always used to say to him, why were you ever in jail anyhow, Bon? You know, what big crime did you commit, you know? And he was always saying, he would hardly ever say anything. And then one day he was sitting there and he says, yeah, you know, when I was in jail, he says, I was put there wrongly accused.
This is FM 104 and Dave Carlson tonight, and we're at the halfway point of the Oz Rock Show. I think it's only fitting at this point that on this day, exactly 9 years after the death of Bon Scott, lead singer with ACDC and one of Australian rock and roll's greatest ever singers, that we pay tribute to him. When Bon joined ACDC in late 1974, he was already an experienced performer, having fronted two top bands of the late 60s, early 70s, Fraternity and the Valentines. With his arrival, the Seedies, as ACDC were nicknamed, began to develop a strong hard rock image, with their aggressive stage act portraying lead guitarist Angus Young as a schoolboy and publicity detailing their hard-drinking, hard-living lifestyles. AC/DC's debut album High Voltage was released in February 1975 and became the second biggest Australian album of that year, staying on the charts for 25 weeks. It was followed in Christmas 1975 by TNT, which continued the momentum and produced the now classic It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll. All up, Bon Scott recorded 7 albums with AC/DC before tragedy struck. On the morning of February 20, 1980, Bon was found dead in his car in South London after one of his notorious drinking binges. The official verdict was that he choked to death. As a former member of AC/DC's sound crew, I can remember Bon Scott well. I toured Australia for 6 months with the band, quite often sharing a motel room with Bon, and even now I can remember him quite vividly. He was one of the real characters of Australian rock and roll. And when I caught up with Angus Young during AC/DC's Australian tour last year, we reminisced about days on the road with Bon Scott. I remember going to a sound check for AC/DC at the Grafton Basketball Stadium. Now that's going back a bit.
Yeah, it is.
In 1975, and I remember you and Malcolm were just kind of working out a riff at that stage, and it was kind of coincidental that a town like Grafton with a notorious jail, you should be putting together a song
about a jail, a jailbreak.
And I remember actually the video was shot not too far away from Long Bay Jail in Sydney as well.
Yeah.
Now, did anything really inspire you to put that song down? Actually, you wrote it with Bon, didn't you?
Yeah, well, me, Malcolm, and Bon. Yeah. Well, it was mainly Bon came up with the idea, you know, and I think possibly from his early convict days, you know. He'd quite a colourful career, did Bon. You know, I think he put Ned Kelly to shame. And I remember him saying at the time, you know, because I always used to say to him, why were you ever in jail anyhow, Bon? You know, what big crime did you commit, you know? And he was always saying, he would hardly ever say anything. And then one day he was sitting there and he says, yeah, you know, when I was in jail, he says, I was put there wrongly accused, you know? He went into the story of what happened, you know. Apparently he was actually playing at the time in some band. He was playing drums or something.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of a ruckus in the hall, and there was some poor girl getting squashed.
Right.
So he jumped down more or less. He jumped off his drum. He was always one for an eye for the ladies. And he jumped in the actual crowd, and he was trying to pull people off, you know. But he didn't know it, and there was some policeman in there, and it was, you know, one of these guys that was always saying, oh, I'm going to get you one day, Bon, you know. And, of course, Bon was sort of pushing everything around, and somebody hit him, you know. And Bon turned around and threw a punch, and it was the cop, you know. So he ended up spending quite a bit of time in one of the local jails out in Fremantle, I think it was. So it virtually all worked around that, you know, and that's what inspired the song.
Really miss Bon a lot still, Angus?
Yeah, I've always, it's because we were always pretty together and everything as people. You know, I mean, when we toured and everything, I mean, we always bunked up together. I mean, in the early days especially, I mean, there were sometimes the 5 of us sleeping in one motel room. You know? And it's, I mean, I do miss him very much in a way, you know. And in some respects, I mean, both in his career and as a person, you know, because Bon was always one of them great people, and if ever you wanted a good time, you just had to go out at night in a town with Bon Scott, you know.
He certainly was a great character. Just about every town you'd go to, Bon would look up his little address book and he'd
He'd have friends, eh?
yeah, exactly.